Imagine this traveller a single clay tablet resting in the half-light of a forgotten storeroom, its surface pressed with symbols so precise they feel less written than placed, as if memory itself once weighed down wet earth and left an imprint that never faded. You are not here by accident. Out of countless moments, this one found you guided by a quiet pull that seems older than curiosity itself. What if the earliest writing humanity ever produced was not storytelling at all, but documentation records of a system already running? Archaeology tells us these tablets appeared suddenly without evolution, carrying calendars, laws and measurements with no visible precursor. Like a signal that flickered once in deep time, then settled into silence. Tonight we'll trace that signal where science ends, myth begins, and an ancient pattern waits to be noticed again. Let's drift a little deeper. Imagine this traveller a single clay tablet resting beneath museum glass, its surface cracked like dry earth after a forgotten rain. Tiny wedge-shaped marks press inward as if gravity itself once leaned down and left instructions behind. Under low light, the tablet does not feel ancient. It feels patient. It feels as though it has been waiting not for discovery but for recognition. You are not listening by accident. Out of billions of possible moments, this one found you through a quiet alignment, like a planet slipping into a stable orbit after drifting for ages. Some encounters do not arrive with urgency or spectacle. They settle gently, already in place, already certain that you would come eventually. There are nights spent alone with maps spread across a desk, dust settling on old atlases, instruments humming softly in the dark. The longer you sit with ancient records, the less they feel like stories, and the more they resemble systems. Writing measurement and calendars do not appear as experiments. They arrive complete confident, as if resumed rather than invented. The earliest Sumerian tablets are not hymns or prayers. They are lists, grain, labour, time, allocation. They speak the language of administration, not wonder. Civilization. We are told begins with awe, yet here at the beginning there is management. Structure is already in motion. Order is assumed, not questioned. What if humanity did not awaken into an open world, but into one already organised? In these tablets, the Anunnaki appear not as comforting gods, but as regulators. They assign placement, define boundaries, and decide function. Humanity enters the record not as a miracle, but as a solution engineered to relieve a system under strain. There is no celebration in this origin, no blessing, no promise. Only calibration. Systems theory tells us that complex structures resist noise. When instability grows, correction follows. In physics, excess energy dissipates. In ecology, populations crash. In ancient myth, floods arrive. Different languages, the same impulse. The Sumerian flood is not framed as moral failure. It is framed as disruption. Humanity grows too loud, too numerous, and the system responds not with rage, but with adjustment. Lifespans shorten, fertility narrows, limits are written into biology itself, control emerges through design rather than punishment. Silence becomes valuable here. Silence is stability. Late at night, reading these lines under a small pool of light, it becomes clear that silence is not empty. Silence is the universe thinking. Even radiation carries memory. Even stone remembers pressure. The Sumerian cosmos is not infinite. It is layered and measured. The sky is segmented like circuitry. Planets are not distant wonders, but signals marking permission and prohibition. Saturn marks limits. Jupiter marks authority. Venus oscillates between creation and conflict. And the heavens enforce timing rather than inspire curiosity. Earth in this view is enclosed not metaphorically but administratively, a defined domain monitored and maintained. Humanity exists between layers soil below and ceiling above. No ascent is promised. Even death moves downward into dust. If this is confinement, the tablets never name it as such. They do not complain. They do not warn. They simply record, and that may be the most unsettling detail of all. When power is absolute, it does not explain itself. It documents, it assumes continuation. It expects compliance without persuasion. Some scholars call this myth, others call it metaphor. Yet the consistency across centuries, cities, and scribal schools suggests something more rigid than imagination alone. Different hands, same structure. Different eras, same assumptions. Perhaps these were not beliefs, but reflections of lived reality. Still, traveller, it is all right to not understand. We are not here to accuse the past or solve it. We are here to listen, to observe how patterns repeat, how gravity remembers mass, how erosion is time thinking slowly, how dust is leftover chronology. Some mysteries are not puzzles to be solved. They are environments to be entered quietly. Tonight, the universe whispers again, and for now we remain still enough to hear it. Long after the first tablets were pressed and set aside to dry their language, continued to repeat itself across centuries like an echo trapped in stone. The words change slightly, the symbols shift, but the structure beneath them remains intact. Humanity is never described as central, it is described as placed. Set into a world that already had boundaries, rhythms, and expectations long before human hands learned to write. In the oldest Sumerian layers, the Anunnaki are not figures of worship in the later sense. They are administrators of domains. One governs the air that moves between heaven and earth. Another governs water design and hidden knowledge. Another attends to fertility and flesh. Each role is fixed. Each realm is sealed. The universe appears less like a mystery unfolding, and more like a machine already assembled, humming quietly in the background of existence. From a modern perspective, this feels eerily familiar. Systems we study today, climate models, orbital mechanics, feedback loops in ecology, all rely on balance and correction. When variables exceed thresholds, consequences follow automatically. No morality is required, only regulation. In this light, the ancient myths read less like superstition, and more like early attempts to describe systemic behaviour using the language available at the time. The tablets describing humanity's creation speak plainly. The lesser gods grow weary of labour. The work is too heavy, the noise too constant. A solution is proposed. Clay is shaped. Divine substance is mixed in. A new being is formed to bear the burden. Humans are created so the overseers may rest. There is no drama here. No rebellion against injustice. Just a problem and an answer. What lingers is not the story itself, but its tone. There is no warmth in it. No sense of partnership. Humanity is introduced as a function within a larger order. Purpose is assigned, not discovered. And threaded through the language is a recurring emphasis on enclosure, on limits, on placement. The earth is divided, the sky is measured, time is segmented. Everything has its allotted space. The heavens in these texts are not infinite, they are layered. Gates are mentioned, pathways described. Movement between realms is possible but controlled. Ziggurats rise in steps not merely as monuments, but as points of contact, anchors between domains. Their names translate not as temples of worship, but as houses of connection between heaven and earth. Maintenance, not transcendence, appears to be their primary role. Night after night, reading these fragments under dim light, one begins to notice how often regulation appears where later traditions would place morality. When humanity becomes too numerous, too disruptive, the response is not instruction or guidance, it is suppression. Plagues arrive, drought follows, finally the flood. Not as punishment for sin, but as population control, noise reduction, system reset. Only one figure intervenes repeatedly, the engineer, the one associated with water and design. He warns humanity quietly, not out of compassion, but perhaps out of redundancy. A complete erasure would destroy the solution itself. After the waters recede, new controls are implemented. Lifespans are shortened. Fertility is limited. Infant mortality increases. These details are embedded subtly, but they form a pattern that is difficult to ignore. From a scientific lens, this resembles recalibration. A system adjusts its parameters to maintain stability. In biology, we see similar processes. In astrophysics, stars regulate their output to avoid collapse. In ancient narrative, humanity is adjusted the same way. The unsettling aspect is not the myth itself, but how consistently it frames human existence as something to be managed. These stories were not marginal. They were copied, archived, taught in scribal schools for over 1,000 years. Kings legitimized their authority by claiming descent from these overseers. Temples were aligned to stars associated with their domains. Time itself was structured according to celestial cycles governed by beings who never truly left the system they designed. As centuries passed later, civilization softened the edges. The overseers gained moral qualities. They became judges of the dead arbiters of justice. Compassion was introduced. Yet beneath these revisions, the original structure remained unchanged. Humanity below, authority above, obedience assumed, the sky watching, the earth enduring. What is rarely addressed is how deeply this worldview may have imprinted itself into later frameworks. The language of servitude echoes forward. Humans created to serve. Earth as a testing ground. Heaven as an unreachable authority. The flood. The shortening of human life. These motifs did not arise independently. They drifted downstream from much older assumptions. There are also absences that speak quietly. Missing tablets, gaps in sequences, catalogues listing works no longer found. Entire sections of mythology hinted at but gone. What survives emphasizes order over freedom, function over choice. Some researchers suggest the language of enclosure may not be metaphorical at all, that the bond between heaven and earth describes a contained system, a managed environment. A prison is too harsh a word, perhaps. The tablets never use it. They speak instead of labor maintenance, punishment, reset. They describe a world where humanity's role is never questioned because it was never chosen. A role inherited at creation. And yet scattered among these texts there are flickers of tension. Kings who defy the gods and prosper briefly. Heroes who seek forbidden knowledge. Gods who argue among themselves. Writing itself occupies an uneasy position. Sometimes it is described as a divine gift, other times as dangerous. Knowledge is allowed, but bounded. If awareness expands too far, correction follows. This anxiety around knowledge appears again and again across cultures as if memory itself was something to be regulated. As these thoughts settle, it becomes clear that the most unsettling question is not whether these beings existed literally, but what kind of worldview could persist so long, so consistently? A worldview in which existence is functional, hierarchical, and closed. A worldview that does not promise ascent, only maintenance. Still, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be noticed, then left to rest. The universe does not demand certainty. It invites observation. Tonight the silence deepens again, and the ancient pattern remains waiting without urgency, content to be remembered slowly. As the narrative deepens, the focus of the tablets quietly shifts. Creation fades into the background, and something colder takes its place: maintenance, oversight, regulation. The language becomes repetitive, almost obsessive, as if the world itself must be constantly reminded how to remain stable. Lists of offerings, work schedules, astronomical cycles, quotas, measurements. Time is no longer something that passes. It is something that must be managed. Clay tablets from cities like Nippur, Lagash and Eridu linger on these details with remarkable precision. They do not ask why life exists. They record how it must continue. Grain allocations are tracked. Labour is assigned. Rituals are scheduled according to the movement of celestial bodies. Life unfolds not as a story of growth, but as a balance to be preserved. Creation is complete. Oversight begins. The Anunnaki recede from dramatic myth and reappear as functions. One governs the air and command, another oversees water and design, another attends to fertility and flesh. Each domain is sealed, each responsibility is bounded. The world is divided into jurisdictions, and humanity exists within them as a dependent population bound to rhythm set from above. What is striking is how little emphasis is placed on belief. Faith is not requested, compliance is assumed. Worship in these texts is not an expression of love or devotion, it is obligation. Offerings are described as sustenance. The gods eat, they drink, they rest when fed properly. When offerings lapse, disaster follows not as punishment but as system failure. Several hymns describe the gods gathering to dine their tables heavy with bread and beer prepared by human hands. The imagery is unsettling in its practicality. Modern readers often dismiss this as symbolic language, but the administrative records support it relentlessly. Rations are calculated. Inventories of livestock are assigned to temples with precision. Priests function as managers. Temples operate as warehouses. Ritual becomes logistics. The divine is not distant or abstract. It is embedded in supply chains and schedules. This functional view of divinity bleeds into the understanding of the cosmos itself. The universe as described by the Sumerians is not an open mystery. It is a managed structure. The sky is layered, segmented, governed. Stars are not distant suns. They are markers, signals, overseers of time. Each planetary body carries authority. Venus governs cycles of war and fertility. Jupiter marks kingship and order. Saturn looms as boundary and limit. Astronomy and astrology are inseparable, not because of superstition, but because observation is tied to permission. Movements in the sky dictate what may occur on Earth. When to plant, when to build, when to wage war. Human agency narrows beneath the weight of celestial timing. Action without alignment invites correction. The heavens do not inspire wonder here. They enforce rhythm. They act as a ceiling rather than an invitation, a boundary that must be respected. The idea of a ceiling returns repeatedly. The firmament is described as solid, hammered into place, holding back upper waters. Above it lies the domain of Anu, distant and inaccessible. Below it, the breathable world governed by command. Humanity lives between layers, unable to rise, unable to escape downward. Even death does not offer ascent. The afterlife is subterranean, dim, ruled by another overseer. Souls descend into dust. There is no promise of elevation. This vertical confinement is rarely acknowledged in modern retellings. Heaven, as later traditions imagine, it does not exist here as a reward. The sky belongs to others. The earth is the work zone. The underworld is the remainder. Within this structure, rebellion is nearly absent. When it appears, it is brief and futile. A human may gain wisdom, but immortality remains out of reach. Knowledge is allowed. Escape is not. Fragments describe humans learning too much, growing too numerous, disturbing the balance. The response is swift. Limits are imposed again. This is where the idea of reset becomes clearer. The flood is not an isolated event. It is part of a pattern. When thresholds are crossed, the system purges excess. The language is impersonal. No rage, no grief, no moral reckoning, just adjustment. From a scientific perspective, this feels uncomfortably familiar. Systems do not care. They respond. A population exceeds carrying capacity. A feedback loop destabilizes. Correction follows. The unsettling aspect is how closely the ancient narrative mirrors this logic long before equations or models existed. It is as if the authors were describing regulation itself, using gods as placeholders for forces they could sense but not quantify. Later civilizations inherited this structure and softened its edges. The flood becomes a lesson in morality. Obedience replaces noise as justification. Yet beneath the revisions, the original framework remains intact. Humanity is still subject to correction. Lifespans remain shortened. Access to knowledge remains restricted. Even writing reflects this hierarchy. Early script is complex, layered, accessible only to trained scribes. Literacy is controlled. Knowledge moves vertically, not freely. Scribes are initiated into secrets that farmers and labourers never touch. Information descends in stages. Temples become nodes of both spiritual and economic power. Grain flows inward. Labour flows inward. Decisions flow outward. The city becomes a microcosm of the cosmos. At the top, the god. Beneath the king, beneath him, priests. Beneath them, workers. Each layer serves the one above. Kingship itself is described as descending from heaven. Not elected, not earned. Lowered into place. The king is not divine, but appointed. A steward tasked with maintaining order and ensuring offerings continue. When kings fail, disasters are interpreted not as political mistakes, but as cosmic disapproval. This worldview leaves little room for progress. Change is dangerous. Stability is sacred. Even art reflects this preference. Figures are rigid, frontal, timeless. The same motifs repeat across centuries. There is comfort in repetition, safety in sameness. Yet beneath this stillness something strains. The very need to suppress suggests pressure. Myths of forbidden knowledge recur. Stories of descent and transgression whisper that movement between layers is possible but costly. In the end, observer, it's all right to not understand. These patterns are heavy, ancient, and slow-moving. Some mysteries do not rush toward answers. They settle instead like dust on forgotten stone. Tonight the universe whispers again, not in words, but in structure. And listening quietly is enough. As centuries pass, the names soften, but the structure remains. The Anunnaki fade from vivid presence into titles, functions, abstractions. They no longer walk openly through stories. They linger instead as principles embedded in law, ritual, and expectation. Authority retreats from visibility, but not from influence. What once arrived as command begins to arrive as habit, and habit over time becomes indistinguishable from nature itself. Clay tablets from later periods reflect this shift subtly. Creation myths thin out. References to origins grow rare. In their place appear endless records of continuity. Offerings, calendars, oaths, omens! The gods no longer design the world. They preserve it. Humanity adapts not because it understands, but because survival depends on alignment. This system no longer announces itself. It simply operates. What changes most noticeably is the treatment of knowledge. In early stories, information flows downward through named figures gifted carefully, sometimes reluctantly. Writing, agriculture, metallurgy, music. Each arrives as a controlled release, useful but bounded. Over time, this pattern hardens. Knowledge becomes tradition rather than revelation. What was once a gift becomes curriculum repetition, memorization pressed again and again into clay. Scribble schools emerge as quiet gatekeepers of memory. Students copy lists of kings, cities, stars, offerings. The same signs are pressed repeatedly, identical wedges forming identical meanings. Original thought is neither encouraged nor required. Accuracy becomes sacred. Deviation is error. Through repetition, the worldview stabilizes, reinforced not through belief but through practice. Memory becomes mechanical, preserved without interpretation. Even the king lists offer a faint echo of something adjusted long ago. They record reigns lasting tens of thousands of years before the flood, then suddenly shortening afterward. This change is often dismissed as mythic exaggeration corrected by realism, yet the pattern aligns closely with earlier flood narratives that speak explicitly of a lifespan reduction as a control measure. Longevity shrinks, authority remains, no explanation is offered, religion adapts alongside power, temples grow larger, more complex, more distant, the gods recede further from direct interaction, ritual replaces dialogue, prayer replaces instruction. Humanity no longer hears the divine speak plainly. Instead, signs are interpreted. Omens are read from stars, dreams, the livers of animals. The divine voice fragments into data points. Meaning must be inferred, never confirmed. This shift coincides with the rise of empires. One city absorbs another. Names change. Languages die. Scripts evolve. Yet functions persist. Old gods are renamed, merged, reorganized to serve new political centers. Authority mirrors heaven. A distant supreme power above, intermediaries beneath, laborers at the base. The hierarchy remains intact, simply translated into new forms. Law codes reflect this cosmic inheritance. They emphasize obedience-duty balance. Justice is not measured by compassion, but by stability. Punishments are severe. Inequality is codified. Different classes receive different justice. The system values order above fairness. What began as cosmic management now governs daily life. Agriculture follows celestial calendars. Trade follows ritualized contracts. Even the body becomes regulated. Family structures mirror property relations. Sexuality, reproduction, inheritance are codified with precision. The human being is fully embedded within the system. Architecture echoes the same logic. City walls grow thicker. Gates are guarded. Movement is controlled. Inside lies order. Outside lies chaos. The boundary between managed and unmanaged space becomes moral as well as physical. The sky remains the ultimate reference point. Astronomy advances not out of curiosity but necessity. Eclipses must be predicted. Planets must be tracked. Festivals must align. Failure invites disaster. The heavens do not inspire awe, they demand accuracy. Over time, the original myths fade from public memory, but their assumptions remain unchallenged. Humanity belongs where it is placed. Authority descends from above. The world has limits. These ideas settle into culture so deeply, they are no longer recognized as inherited. Even the concept of the soul shifts. In early thought, it is a fragile breath, temporary without promise of ascent. Later traditions introduce judgment, reward, punishment. Yet these developments do not free the soul. They bind it more tightly. Moral surveillance replaces physical oversight. As the gods disappear from overt narrative control moves inward, humans begin to police themselves through guilt, fear, hope. The system becomes self-sustaining. Early art depicts gods towering over humans physically present. Later art abstracts divinity into symbols, wings, discs, thrones. Authority becomes everywhere and nowhere at once. Language adapts. Words for obedience and submission multiply. Civilization is said to mature. Religion deepens. Society becomes moral. Yet beneath this narrative lies continuity. The same hierarchical structure persists, refined and reinforced. The old question of purpose never disappears. It simply becomes harder to articulate. Humans labor. They reproduce. They obey laws they did not create. The original explanation for this arrangement dissolves into abstraction. Occasionally, cracks appear. Mystical traditions arise at the margins, whispering of hidden knowledge, imprisoned light-forgotten origins. These ideas echo ancient themes but are quickly absorbed or suppressed. Orthodoxy prevails. Unity is enforced. The world grows quieter in one sense. No more gods walking among humans, no more direct commands from the sky. Yet the silence feels heavy, structured, complete. By the time overt overseers vanish, the architecture of control has already migrated. It moves into new languages, new scriptures, new empires. Clay tablets crumble, but their logic survives. Humanity accepts limitation as natural. History remembers creation, but forgets intent. The overseers may be gone from sight, but their design continues to operate quietly. Traveller, there is no need to decide whether this is myth or metaphor. The weight of it does not depend on belief. It rests in repetition, in pattern, in the way structures endure long after their builders disappear. Some mysteries do not ask to be solved. They ask only to be noticed. Tonight that is enough. Time continues its slow rearrangement. Empires rise, names change languages, thin into dust, yet the deeper architecture remains untouched. What was once expressed through gods and omens begins to surface as philosophy, cosmology, and eventually as assumptions about what it means to be human. The ancient hierarchy does not disappear. It refines itself, exchanging myth for reason, command for principle, voice for structure. In Greek thought, the universe becomes ordered, rational, precise. Each thing has its place. Motion follows law. The heavens are perfect, eternal, unchanging. The earth is corruptible, temporary, heavy. Humanity stands between aspiring upward but bound downward by nature. This is presented as wisdom, as clarity, as progress. Yet the shape is familiar. Authority remains above. Limitation remains below. Plato's world of forms does not free the human spirit. It confines it. Truth exists elsewhere beyond reach. The physical world is a shadow, a cave. Knowledge becomes remembrance rather than discovery. Meaning is external. Fulfillment lies outside lived experience. Aristotle refines this, further transforming myth into mechanism. Everything moves toward its natural place. Stones fall, fire rises. Order is not imposed, it is justified. Social structures align effortlessly with this cosmology. Inequality is not cruelty. It is alignment with nature. Some rule, some serve. The sky still governs the ground. Later religious systems inherit this worldview almost seamlessly. Heaven remains distant and perfect. Earth remains flawed and temporary. Life becomes preparation rather than participation. Meaning is postponed beyond death. This postponement is powerful. A species convinced that fulfillment lies elsewhere will tolerate almost anything here. Suffering becomes bearable if it is framed as temporary. Labour becomes virtuous if it earns future rest. Obedience becomes noble if it leads to eventual reward. The ancient labour contract evolves into a metaphysical one written not in clay, but in conscience. The notion of a fallen world deepens this arrangement. Humanity is taught not only that it must serve, but that it deserves limitation. Original design is replaced by original sin. The burden shifts inward. Humans begin to police themselves more effectively than any overseer ever could. Control no longer requires presence. It requires belief. Entire civilizations operate beneath invisible ceilings, convinced they are self-imposed. As centuries pass, theology gives way to ideology. Empires fall, but structures persist. Feudal systems mirror celestial hierarchies. Kings rule by divine right. Peasants labour by inherited duty. Stability is sacred. Mobility is rare. The architecture holds. The industrial age appears briefly to fracture this pattern. Machines replace muscle. Science replaces scripture. Old hierarchies crack. Yet the deeper structure remains intact. Humanity is still bound to work. Time becomes segmented, monetized, extracted. The factory replaces the temple. The clock replaces the priest. Liberation is promised, then deferred. Technology advances. Efficiency increases. Rest recedes. Surveillance becomes subtle, embedded in systems rather than symbols. Data replaces divination. Algorithms replace omens. The sky, once the domain of gods, becomes the domain of satellites. Communication blankets the planet. Observation becomes constant. The heavens watch again, silently. The language is secular, but the impulse is ancient. Order must be maintained. Disruption must be neutralized. Excess must be corrected. Populations are managed through economics, information psychology. Growth must be regulated. Resources are finite. Behavior must be guided. The old flood myths return in new vocabulary. Humanity is framed once more as a disruptive force exceeding its limits. Solutions focus not on liberation but on control, regulation, restriction, reduction. The question of origin fades further from consciousness. Few remember that humanity was once described not as a miracle but as a utility. Fewer still consider how that framing shaped millennia of culture. Yet traces remain, in the discomfort with idleness, in the suspicion of joy without productivity, in the moral weight assigned to work. These are not instincts, they are inheritances. Even dreams are colonized. Aspirations are shaped by systems that reward compliance. Success is defined narrowly. Failure is internalized as personal fault. One may travel anywhere on Earth, access endless information, yet still feel confined. Not by walls, but by expectations. Not by gods, but by narratives. Occasionally individuals sense the cage. Philosophers, mystics, artists speak of illusion of awakening of hidden chains. Their voices are tolerated only while they remain abstract. When such ideas threaten structure, they are absorbed or silenced. The system adapts. It evolves. What it does not do is disappear. The most unsettling possibility is not that humanity was once controlled, but that control succeeded so completely it no longer needs to announce itself. Obedience becomes normal. Limitation feels natural. From gods to kings, from kings to laws, from laws to systems, the same pattern persists. Authority above, labour below, meaning deferred. The enclosure was never meant to feel like confinement. It was meant to feel like reality itself. The walls are invisible. The ceiling is rarely named. Modern life keeps humanity occupied. Goals, obligations, identities, distractions. Enough motion to avoid stillness. Enough noise to drown memory. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Stillness feels wrong. Yet it is in silence that the old questions surface, questions the system cannot answer without unravelling itself. Traveller, none of this demands belief, it asks only for attention. Patterns do not require faith, they require patience. Tonight, as thought slows, and the edges of awareness soften, it is enough to notice the continuity. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, they are meant to be felt quietly as the universe whispers again. Night stretches wider now, and the world seems to breathe more slowly. After centuries of inherited structure, something subtle begins to shift. Not outwardly, not in law or architecture, but inwardly, where systems have always struggled to reach. Even the most refined enclosure cannot fully seal the inner horizon. Awareness adapts, waits, and sometimes slips through the smallest openings left by fatigue, grief, wonder, or silence. Long nights with instruments with charts spread across desks dusted by decades teach us certain humility. Patterns repeat, but not perfectly. Anomalies appear, small deviations that refuse to vanish. In physics, they are called noise. In geology, they are fractures. In history, they are heresies, mystics, unclassifiable thinkers who pause too long, listen too deeply, and return changed. Systems tolerate them until they do not. Ancient traditions preserved faint traces of this tension. Gnostic texts spoke quietly of imprisonment of a world fashioned by lesser powers, orderly but incomplete. Liberation did not arrive through obedience but through remembrance. These ideas did not spread because they were false, but because they were destabilizing. Knowledge, when it inverts hierarchy, is more dangerous than rebellion. It dissolves the need for authority altogether. Similar intuitions surfaced far from Mesopotamia. In Eastern philosophies, the world becomes illusion not as deception but as misidentification. Suffering arises when structures are mistaken for self. Liberation does not come from fixing the world but from seeing through it. Different language, same whisper. Something about the human condition feels misaligned, as if consciousness exceeds its assigned container. Modern science brushes against this without naming it. Consciousness resists reduction. Neurons fire. Signals propagate. Yet the experience of being aware remains elusive, unmeasured, strangely surplus. If humanity existed solely for function, reflex would suffice. Automation would suffice. Yet imagination persists. Depth persists. The ability to question the system that produced the questioner persists. This excessive awareness is curious. Systems optimized for efficiency rarely tolerate redundancy. And yet here it is, generation after generation, a quiet overflow that serves no clear purpose. Why does a world shaped for labor produce beings capable of contemplation? Why does an enclosed structure generate myths of escape, ascent, return? Perhaps awareness itself was never fully contained. Perhaps it could not be. Modern life attempts to manage this surplus with stimulation, endless information, constant alerts, noise layered upon noise. Silence becomes rare, almost threatening. Stillness feels unproductive, yet in rare moments when the noise recedes, something stirs. Time loosens. Identity softens. The sense of being more than a role emerges without effort, like a memory surfacing from beneath sediment. These moments are brief. They are often dismissed as impractical or indulgent. Still, they recur. In nature, in grief, in deep fatigue, in nights when the world finally quiets and the sky feels vast again. They suggest the enclosure is not total. It never was. A perfect prison leaves no room for reflection. No cracks, no silence. What persists instead is a structure tolerant of gaps. Perhaps those gaps serve a function of their own, or perhaps eliminating them would destabilize the system entirely. Ancient myths warned of knowledge that should not be gained, forbidden trees, hidden tablets, sealed books. The fear is consistent across cultures. Awareness threatens order, yet awareness continues to surface quietly, persistently. Traveller notice how often restlessness appears without cause, how dissatisfaction lingers even amid comfort, how success relieves pressure but rarely brings peace. These sensations are not failures, they may be signals. The enclosure relies on distraction not because awareness is rare, but because it is common. Silence reveals it too easily. When individuals step outside prescribed rhythms through retreat meditation, or simply sustained stillness, the system loosens its grip. Not dramatically, not permanently, just enough to be felt. These moments are often followed by return accompanied by reluctance, a sense of loss, a fading memory. Ancient initiation rites mirrored this pattern. Temporary exit, altered perception, return to structure. Modern cultures largely replaced these thresholds with consumption and spectacle, yet the impulse remains. The ancient tablets never spoke directly of this inner dimension. They focused on order-labor hierarchy. Their silence on interiority may itself be revealing. What cannot be easily regulated is often left unnamed. As technology advances, the enclosure tightens in some ways and loosens in others. Physical labor declines, cognitive labor expands. Automation frees attention only to recapture it. Yet pressure builds. People question meaning more openly. The old narratives of progress no longer satisfy. Comfort no longer guarantees contentment. This is not awakening, it is accumulation. When awareness accumulates without outlet, systems destabilize. Historically, such moments precede transformation or collapse. Ancient floods were one response. Modern resets take quieter forms. Economic crashes, cultural upheavals. Each erases memory, redistributes power, reinforces dependency. The underlying structure remains intact. The idea of a planet-sized prison becomes less literal here and more existential. The enclosure is not walls or guards. It is narrative, assumption. The belief that what is must be all that can be. Breaking such an enclosure does not require force, it requires perception. Perception, however, is fragile. It requires conditions rarely permitted by modern life. Sleep has always been sacred for this reason. Dreams bypass control. They reorder meaning. They remember what waking life forgets. The system tolerates sleep because it must, but it fills waking hours with urgency to compensate. Tonight, as thought slows and defenses soften, those edges become accessible again. The ancient clay lies silent now, but the conditions it described remain active. Humanity lives inside a structure older than memory, refined beyond recognition. Yet awareness continues to flicker, not as rebellion, not as doctrine, as a quiet sense that existence is deeper than assignment. This sense does not demand answers. It waits. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be observed, felt gently like gravity as memory pulling inward. Silence is the universe thinking, and tonight the universe whispers again. The night deepens further, and with it comes a quieter layer of attention. After long ages of adaptation, something in humanity begins to sense repetition itself as weight. Days resemble one another too closely. Aspirations circle back into familiar channels. Progress feels real, yet strangely circular, like walking a vast perimeter without ever reaching an edge. This is not despair. It is fatigue born from continuity, from sustaining a posture long after its necessity has faded. By this stage, the enclosure no longer needs enforcement. It has become instinct. Systems are treated as inevitable. Constraints are framed as necessities. Survival is offered as justification enough. What ancient myth expressed through gods, modern life expresses through requirement. Economies demand growth. Growth demands labour. Labour consumes time. Time erodes reflection. The cycle sustains itself without conscious intent. Individuals succeed or fail within this rhythm, yet the architecture itself remains untouched. Choice exists, but mostly in scale, not in direction. One may choose how to work, rarely whether to work. One may question, but only within sanctioned frames. Conditioning begins early. Children learn to sit still, follow schedules, measure worth through performance. Curiosity is rewarded selectively. Creativity is encouraged when it produces value. Obedience arrives long before it is named. Education asks not what a human being is, but what a human being can do. The ancient pattern persists quietly. Humanity as instrument, humanity as resource, humanity as maintenance. Even language reveals it. Time is spent, energy is managed, relationships are optimized. Life becomes a ledger of allocation. Exhaustion is praised as commitment. Stillness becomes suspect. Silence interrupts production. Silence invites thought. Thought risks destabilization. And so noise fills every gap. Entertainment, information, urgency. There is always something asking for attention. Awareness fragments. Long arcs of thought grow rare. Memory shortens. Without memory, systems feel eternal. Technology accelerates this fragmentation. Tools promise connection and deliver distraction. Devices compress time, collapsing past and future into an endless present. The mind adapts by skimming, reacting, scrolling. Depth becomes effortful. Reflection becomes labor. In this state, even oppression loses clarity. There is no single force to resist. Power is diffuse, procedural, automated. Participation feels voluntary even when withdrawal feels impossible. The ancient overseers would recognize this achievement. Control refined into habit. Governance dissolved into environment. The body carries a quieter memory. Fatigue accumulates not only from effort but from misalignment. Muscles tighten, breath shortens, sleep thins. The nervous system remains alert, waiting for demands that never fully arrive. Always available, always responsive, always anticipating instruction. The difference now is that instruction rarely comes explicitly. Expectations are internalized. People optimize themselves preemptively. The system saves energy by letting individuals govern themselves. This self-governance is praised as responsibility, framed as maturity, rewarded as virtue. Yet the cost is subtle. When purpose is supplied from outside, inner direction atrophies. Desire becomes derivative. Identity becomes role-based. When roles shift or collapse, disorientation follows, not liberation, confusion. This confusion is often medicalized. Anxiety, depression, burnout. Language suggests personal malfunction rather than systemic strain. Treatment focuses on adjustment, coping, resilience, rarely on questioning the structure that produces the strain. Ancient cultures interpreted similar distress as spiritual imbalance. Modern culture calls it chemical. Both seek correction rather than transformation. Achievement brings relief, not fulfillment. Milestones pass. Something remains unresolved. The horizon recedes. Satisfaction fades quickly. This pattern is ancient. The Sumerian texts described gods who were never satisfied, who demanded continual offerings. Modern systems mirror this hunger. Metrics rise. Targets shift. Enough is never enough. Humanity is suspended between aspiration and exhaustion, motion and depletion. Crises expose this fragility. Pandemics, financial collapses, ecological disruptions. For brief moments, routines break. Time loosens. People glimpse the constructed nature of normality. These glimpses rarely last. The priority becomes restoration, returning to normal, rebuilding the same structures with greater efficiency. The opportunity for reimagining slips away. Ancient floods reset populations. Modern crises reset economies. Both preserve the underlying order. The idea of a planet-sized prison need not imply cruelty. It implies design. A system optimized for stability rather than freedom. For continuity rather than exploration. For maintenance rather than emergence. If humanity was once framed as labor sustaining a larger order, that framing has evolved but not dissolved. The order no longer requires gods. It is embedded in infrastructure psychology culture. The question of who benefits becomes irrelevant. The system perpetuates itself. It does not need intention, only momentum. Still, no system is without anomalies. Individuals withdraw. Communities simplify. Moments arise when people step outside prescribed rhythms and feel a lightness they cannot explain. These moments are fragile. They are dismissed as impractical, naive, unrealistic. Yet they recur. They always recur. The persistence of artistic expression, spiritual longing, philosophical inquiry suggests something in the human psyche resists full assimilation. A residue remains. a sense that existence could unfold differently. This residue is not loud, it does not organize, it does not demand. It appears in contemplation in nature in unstructured time. It invites remembrance rather than revolt. Remembrance is dangerous to closed systems not because it incites violence, but because it reintroduces choice. To remember that structures were built is to sense they can be unbuilt. To remember that purpose was assigned is to glimpse self-authored meaning. The ancient tablets did not encourage such remembrance. They recorded order. They normalized hierarchy. Modern life continues this with remarkable fidelity. Yet as night deepens and motion slows, the outlines of continuity become easier to feel. Not as fear, as heaviness. Life feels full yet constrained, movement constant yet limited. Humanity was once described as a solution. Modern systems call humanity a resource. Both imply usage, neither implies freedom. And still awareness flickers, quietly, enough to notice the pattern, enough to sense the shape of walls without seeing them. Somewhere between fatigue and insight, a gentle understanding forms. The enclosure does not need to be broken to be recognized. Recognition alone changes the relationship. In the end, observer, it is all right to not understand. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again. The sky has always been the quietest witness. Long before it was mapped by satellites or reduced to equations, it hung above human life as both ceiling and promise. Ancient cultures did not gaze upward in wonder alone. They measured tract obeyed. The heavens were not distant abstractions. They were regulators, clocks carved in light patterns that decided when crops would rise, when wars would begin, when kings would fall. In the earliest Mesopotamian worldview, the sky was layered and governed. It was not infinite, it was arranged. Stars were not suns scattered by chance, but markers of authority. Each planetary body carried instruction. Venus governed fertility and conflict. Jupiter signalled kingship and order. Saturn lingered as boundary and limit. Astronomy and obedience grew together, woven into a single discipline of attention. Observation was not curiosity, it was necessity. A misread sky meant famine. A missed alignment meant disorder. Human agency narrowed beneath the weight of celestial timing. Action without alignment invited correction. The heavens did not inspire awe. They demanded accuracy. In this relationship, the sky became less a mystery than a schedule, less a question than a command. The idea of a firmament appears repeatedly described as solid, hammered into place holding back upper waters. Above it lay a domain unreachable. Below it, the breathable world of labour and growth. Humanity lived between layers, unable to rise, unable to descend beyond death. Even the afterlife offered no escape. Souls moved downward into dim continuity, not upward into light. This vertical confinement is often softened in later retellings. Modern imagination prefers ascension. Yet the older memory lingers beneath doctrine. The sky belongs to others. The earth is the work zone. The underworld is the remainder. Within this structure, rebellion is rare and brief. When it appears, it is corrected. When knowledge exceeds allowance, limits are imposed. Floods, droughts, plagues appear not as moral punishments but as recalibrations. A system drifting out of tolerance is adjusted. Population reduced, lifespan shortened, fertility regulated. These events read less like stories and more like maintenance logs written in mythic language. The tone is impersonal. There is no rage, only correction. As centuries pass, the heavens retreat into abstraction. Gods no longer walk openly. They thin into principles, then into laws, yet the structure remains intact. The sky continues to govern the ground. Even as belief shifts, alignment persists. Calendars grow more precise, rituals more complex. Time itself becomes regulated. Modern science dissolves the firmament physically. The sky opens, planets become worlds, stars become suns, the universe expands beyond imagination. And yet something curious remains unchanged. Despite cosmic vastness, humanity still experiences itself as constrained. New laws replace old ones. Gravity replaces gods. Determinism replaces fate. The language shifts, but the effect persists. The universe becomes mechanistic, governed by equations. Freedom recedes into abstraction. Even thought is framed as reaction impulse chemistry. The sense of being embedded within a system beyond control deepens rather than fades. The sky no longer commands, but it still limits. Satellites now watch silently where stars once watched symbolically. Orbits dictate communication. Algorithms guide movement. The heavens are no longer divine, but they are operational. Observation becomes constant. Data flows downward. Decisions follow. The sky still governs the ground, only now through infrastructure rather than myth. The ancient fear of noise returns in new form. Disruption threatens stability. Variance must be managed. Populations are modelled. Behaviour predicted. Correction becomes preemptive. The language is secular, but the impulse is old. Order must be maintained. Excess neutralised. Balance preserved. Traveller, notice how often the sky appears in moments of reflection, not as object, but as presence. Long nights watching instruments hum softly. Maps spread across desks collecting dust. The quiet realization that patterns persist regardless of belief. The sky does not care what we call it. It continues its motion patient and precise. Erosion thinks slowly. Radiation whispers without sound. Gravity remembers every mass it has touched. These forces do not judge, they do not explain, they operate. In their steadiness they mirror the ancient structure that placed humanity between above and below, between reach and restraint. The question becomes less about whether the sky is a prison, and more about why the image persists. Why do so many cultures imagine ceilings limits thresholds beyond which humans should not pass? Why does ascent feel dangerous? Why does stillness feel wrong? These questions do not accuse, they linger. Somewhere between myth and measurement, a quiet tension remains. The universe expands outward, yet experience feels bounded. Knowledge increases, yet freedom feels deferred. The sky opens physically, but psychologically it remains just out of reach. This contradiction is not dramatic. It is subtle. It hums beneath daily life. Perhaps the sky was never meant to confine but to remind. A mirror rather than a wall. Or perhaps reminders become walls when remembered too literally. In the end, the distinction may not matter. What matters is how the presence is felt. Tonight the sky is dark and vast and silent. It does not instruct, it does not threaten, it simply is. And in that stillness, observer, it is all right to not understand. Some mysteries remain overhead, not to be solved, but to be lived beneath. Tonight the universe whispers again. The earth remembers differently than the sky. Where the heavens move with precise indifference, the ground beneath us carries weight scarred by time thinking slowly. Layers settle, compress, erode. Mountains rise and are worn down, grain by grain. Rivers carve memory into stone. Nothing is erased. It's only rearranged, pressed deeper, hidden beneath newer surfaces that forget what they rest upon. Ancient civilizations sensed this. They built downward as much as upward. Foundations mattered. Cities were placed carefully aligned not only to stars but to faults, waters and soils that breathed beneath them. The earth was not inert, it responded. Crops failed. Ground shifted. Floodplains swallowed entire settlements. These were not anomalies. They were reminders that stability was borrowed, never owned. In Mesopotamia, the land itself demanded constant attention. Canals clogged. Salinity crept upward. Fields exhausted quickly. Humanity laboured endlessly just to keep the earth producing. This labour shaped identity. Farming was not a choice, it was maintenance. The ground had to be persuaded, corrected, disciplined, much like the population that worked it. This relationship bred a particular humility. The earth was generous but conditional. It rewarded precision and punished neglect. Rituals grew around seasons, floods, and planting cycles. Offerings were made not only to gods but to soil itself, an acknowledgement that survival depended on forces that could not be argued with or escaped. Over time, this dependence hardened into worldview. Humanity belonged to the earth, bound by gravity and necessity. Even death did not release this bond. Bodies returned to dust. Souls descended rather than ascended. The underworld was not punishment, it was continuity. The earth kept what it shaped. As myths softened, the pattern remained. The ground became property resource territory. Boundaries were drawn, walls thickened, inside lay order, outside lay chaos. The earth was partitioned and claimed, yet still demanded obedience. Droughts ignored borders. Earthquakes erased cities indiscriminately. The illusion of control was always fragile. Modern civilization inherited this tension. Technology insulated humanity from soil, yet dependence never vanished. Food travelled farther, labour shifted indoors. Still the earth underwrote everything. Minerals extracted, energy burned, waste buried. The surface grew smooth and managed, but beneath it pressures accumulated. Geology teaches patience. Stress builds invisibly until it releases suddenly. Faults lock, tension grows. Then without warning the ground moves. Entire landscapes rearrange in seconds. No negotiation, no morality, just physics fulfilling itself. These events remind us how thin the layer of normality truly is. Climate behaves similarly. Small changes compound, ice melts quietly, oceans warm fraction by fraction. Then thresholds are crossed, systems shift, storms intensify, coastlines retreat. Humanity responds with measurement modelling regulation. Yet beneath the language of management lies an older fear. The earth is adjusting again. Traveller, consider how often catastrophe is framed as imbalance, carbon imbalance, ecological imbalance, population imbalance. The language echoes ancient maintenance myths. When thresholds are crossed, corrections follow. The earth does not rage, it recalibrates. Floods return, droughts spread. Fertility declines in unexpected ways. The idea of a reset feels disturbingly familiar, not as apocalypse but as process. A system exceeding tolerance must shed excess. Ancient floods culled populations. Modern crises redistribute survival unevenly. The earth remains indifferent to narratives of progress. It responds only to pressure. Yet humanity persists, adapting, rebuilding, repeating. Cities rise atop ruins, roads trace older paths, foundations reuse ancient stones. The earth becomes a palimpsest of occupation. Every generation believes itself new, unaware of how often its footprints align with those long erased. Archaeology reveals this layering vividly. Beneath modern streets lie forgotten temples. Beneath those earlier settlements, each believed itself stable. Each left traces of anxiety etched into walls, rituals, and laws. Humanity has always lived atop its own history, rarely pausing long enough to feel the depth beneath its feet. The earth carries all of it. Bones, tools, ash, memories fossilized into matter, radiation whispers from ancient explosions. Isotopes mark moments when skies darkened and life struggled. Extinctions leave signatures in stone. The ground does not forget. It records patiently, indifferent to interpretation. Modern science reads these records with increasing clarity. Ice cores reveal atmospheres from hundreds of thousands of years ago. Sediment layers tell of floods older than cities. Craters hint at impacts that reshaped climates. Humanity learns slowly that it is not the first to believe the world was stable. Despite this knowledge, daily life proceeds as if permanence were assured. Buildings rise taller, systems grow more complex, dependence deepens. The earth absorbs the strain until it cannot. Then adjustment arrives, not as judgment, but as consequence. This rhythm is ancient. Perhaps this is why the earth feels heavier than the sky. Gravity presses constantly, a reminder of limits. Where the heavens invite imagination, the ground enforces reality. We cannot float. We must stand, plant, build, bury. The earth keeps us anchored whether we wish it or not. In this anchoring there is both confinement and comfort. The earth gives form. It holds weight. It allows rest. Lying down, one feels the pull, directly muscles surrendering to support. Sleep becomes a small surrender to gravity, a trust that the ground will hold through unconsciousness. Ancient people understood this intimately. burial rites returned bodies to soil deliberately. Life began from clay and ended in it. The cycle closed neatly. Modern culture distances itself from this truth, yet the body still knows. Fatigue accumulates in bones. Rest seeks horizontal stillness. Listener, notice how calm arrives when contact deepens. Bare feet on ground, hands in soil. Long walks without destination. The nervous system softens, breath lengthens. The body remembers an older relationship, one not mediated by screens or schedules. Perhaps the earth is not a prison floor, but a teacher of limits. Or perhaps limits become prison-like only when resisted. Either way, the lesson persists. Nothing escapes gravity forever. Even satellites fall eventually. Everything returns slowly to ground. In the end, it's all right to not understand the full design. The earth does not ask comprehension. It asks attention, care, respect for thresholds. Tonight as sleep approaches, feel the weight beneath you. The steady pull, the quiet support. Silence is the earth resting. Erosion pauses in the dark. Pressure redistributes unseen. Tomorrow will come. The ground will still be there. And somewhere deep below, the long memory continues patient and unmoved, while the universe whispers again. Time bends gently here, not forward or backward, but inward. After sky and earth have revealed their pattern, something quieter remains, something that does not belong entirely to either domain. It settles between breath and thought, between memory and sensation. This is where return begins, not as movement through space, but as a shift of attention away from structure and toward experience itself. Civilizations have always spoken of return, though rarely in the same language. Some called it homecoming, others named it judgment, resurrection, awakening. Beneath the differences lies a shared intuition. After long cycles of labor and correction, something must come back to itself, not to origins as history, but to origins as presence. Ancient myths often framed return as dangerous. Those who travelled beyond assigned limits risked losing their place. Heroes descended and returned, altered, unable to fully belong again. This fear was not irrational. To step outside a system even briefly is to see it from the edge. What is seen cannot be unseen. Returning means carrying that awareness quietly, often without language to explain it. Modern life offers fewer rituals for such returns. Experience flows continuously, rarely punctuated by thresholds. Yet moments still arise. Exhaustion that forces pause, loss that interrupts momentum, awe that dissolves urgency. In these moments, the system loosens its grip just enough for something else to surface. That something is not revelation. It is familiarity. A sense that awareness itself is older than the roles it inhabits. Older than names, older than instruction. Like gravity, it does not announce itself. It simply pulls attention inward toward what is already here. In laboratories late at night, when instruments hum softly and data streams blur into background noise, this feeling sometimes appears. Not insight, but stillness. The realization that measurement can describe behavior but not experience. That equations map emotion but not meaning. That something essential remains untouched by precision. This is not failure of science. It is humility. Every system, no matter how complete, leaves residue. Consciousness remains that residue. It observes systems without fully belonging to them. This observation is not defiance. It is coexistence. Return, then, is not escape from structure. It is release from identification with structure. One still participates. One still works, builds, maintains. But the inner posture changes. Roles become tools rather than definitions. Identity softens. The urgency to justify existence fades. Ancient texts rarely describe this state directly. They hinted at it through figures who walked between domains. Messengers, tricksters, wanderers. These characters never settled comfortably. They moved knowledge without owning it. They disrupted gently, not through force, but through perspective. Modern psychology touches this idea cautiously. Flow states, presence, non-attachment. Language circles the experience without capturing it. The experience itself remains simple. Awareness rests without striving. Time loosens, the future recedes, the past softens. What remains is immediate and sufficient. This return does not feel triumphant, it feels ordinary, almost disappointing in its simplicity. There is no promise of freedom from systems, no grand resolution. Instead, there is acceptance without surrender, participation without confusion, engagement without fear. Traveller, this may be why sleep holds such power. In sleep, identity dissolves temporarily, roles vanish, the system pauses its demands, the body returns to rhythm, breath deepens, muscles release, consciousness drifts without obligation. For hours the enclosure loosens. Dreams wander freely through layers that waking life rarely allows. Past and future blend. Symbols replace instruction. Meaning appears without explanation. The system tolerates this because it must. Without sleep the organism fails. Yet in sleep the organism remembers something older than function. Return does not mean staying in that state. Morning arrives. Roles resume. Systems hum back to life. But something subtle lingers, a faint spaciousness, a reduced urgency, a sense that participation is not total surrender. Ancient initiation rites understood this rhythm, temporary withdrawal followed by return. The initiate came back changed not visibly but inwardly. Modern cultures rarely mark this transformation, yet it still occurs quietly, often unnoticed even by those experiencing it. The danger to long-standing systems is not rebellion. It is calm. Calm does not rush. Calm does not fear. Calm does not need permission. Systems thrive on urgency and noise. Calm introduces friction without resistance. This is why return is rarely encouraged. Movement outward is rewarded. Accumulation is praised. Rest is rationed. Yet the body insists. Fatigue accumulates. Attention frays. Eventually return is forced through burnout, illness, or withdrawal. The system interprets this as failure. It is not. It is correction. Correction does not always arrive as catastrophe. Sometimes it arrives as quiet disinterest. Old goals lose their shine. Ambition softens. The drive to optimize fades. Life continues but with less tension, less performance, more inhabiting. This state does not oppose structure, it simply refuses to mistake structure for self. The enclosure remains, but it no longer defines the horizon. Awareness expands within its limits, finding room where none was expected. In ancient terms, this might have been called wisdom. In modern terms, it has no stable name. It appears as maturity perspective acceptance. None fully capture it. Words are poor containers for this kind of shift. Return is not an ending, it is a settling. The long arc of labour and correction relaxes slightly. The need to prove, to justify, to strive endlessly diminishes. Life becomes less about assignment and more about presence. As night deepens again, thought slows naturally. The body prepares for rest. Systems continue. The world hums. Yet awareness turns inward not to escape but to rest. This rest is not passive, it is restorative. In the end, listener, it is all right to not resolve the mystery. Some journeys conclude not with answers, but with ease. Return does not undo the enclosure, it changes how one lives within it. And as sleep approaches, that is enough. The universe keeps watch. You may rest now. The world grows quieter now, not because it has changed, but because attention has softened. After long cycles of sky and earth, of labour and return, something steadier emerges. It does not announce itself. It does not demand interpretation. It settles like dusk gradually until edges blur and urgency loosens its grip. This is reflection, not as analysis, but as gentle witnessing. Humanity has always reflected in fragments, in pauses between harvests, in the stillness after storms, in nights when firelight flickered against stone walls and stories slowed into murmurs. Reflection was never meant to be constant. Too much awareness at once can fracture a system, and yet without reflection meaning thins until motion becomes automatic. The Sumerian scribes understood this instinctively. Their tablets record order obsessively, yet their myths carry strange hesitations. Gods argue, decisions are reversed, floods are regretted, limits are adjusted. Even within rigid hierarchies, uncertainty leaks through. The system operates, but it is not perfectly sealed. Reflection lives in those leaks, in the moments when explanation falters, when a story feels incomplete, when a rule requires repetition to sustain belief. These are not errors. They are pressure points where awareness presses gently against structure, testing its elasticity. Modern life offers fewer natural pauses. Artificial light erases night. Schedules compress rest. Information flows without interruption. Reflection must be reclaimed intentionally or it disappears altogether. When it does appear, it often feels uncomfortable at first, like stepping into silence after long exposure to noise. Silence reveals patterns the mind prefers to avoid, how often movement substitutes for direction, how productivity replaces presence, how identity becomes entangled with function. These realizations are rarely dramatic. They arrive as mild disquiet, a sense that something is slightly misaligned. Reflection does not seek to correct this misalignment immediately. It simply notices. Noticing alone can be enough. Systems rely on unconscious participation. Awareness introduces friction without resistance. It slows reaction. It widens perspective. It restores proportion. Ancient philosophers spoke of balance not as stasis but as responsiveness. A reed bends, a river adjusts. Reflection is the human equivalent of this flexibility. It allows movement without collapse, adaptation without erasure. Consider how often reflection emerges at the edges of life, during illness, after loss, in aging, when ambition softens naturally. These moments are often framed as decline, yet they carry a different kind of clarity, less urgency, more patience, a willingness to sit with unanswered questions. The enclosure described by ancient myths depends on momentum. Reflection interrupts momentum gently. It does not oppose structure, it pauses it. In that pause, the weight of long narratives becomes apparent, not as oppression, but as inheritance. Human beings inherit more than genetics. They inherit assumptions, rhythms, expectations about effort, worth, success, failure. Reflection allows these inheritances to be seen rather than lived unconsciously. Seeing does not require rejection. It requires honesty. This honesty is quiet. It does not announce conclusions. It tolerates ambiguity. It recognizes that systems exist for reasons even if those reasons no longer serve fully. It holds complexity without demanding resolution. Science itself depends on this kind of reflection. Hypotheses pause certainty. Anomalies challenge models. Progress occurs not through blind accumulation, but through careful reconsideration. Reflection is built into inquiry, even if it is often rushed. In long nights with instruments and data, reflection arises naturally. When patterns repeat too cleanly, when results feel complete yet unsatisfying, when the question shifts from how something works to what it means to observe it at all. This shift does not undermine knowledge, it deepens it. Understanding expands to include limits. Precision coexists with humility. Mystery remains without becoming threat. Reflection also softens fear. Fear thrives on immediacy, on reaction, on urgency. When reflection slows perception, fear loses momentum. It does not vanish. It becomes manageable, contextualized. This may be why reflection is often discouraged in systems optimized for efficiency. Efficiency requires speed. Speed compresses perspective. Reflection widens it. Wide perspective complicates simple directives. Traveler reflection is not withdrawal, it is presence without compulsion. One still acts, but action arises from clarity rather than pressure. Effort becomes measured, rest becomes legitimate. Silence becomes informative rather than empty. The ancient world encoded reflection into ritual. Seasonal pauses, sacred days, times when labour ceased and attention turned inward. Modern life erodes these pauses, yet the need persists. When ignored, reflection returns as burnout, dissatisfaction, or vague unease. These signals are not flaws, they are corrections. The system does not punish reflection. It produces symptoms when reflection is absent. The body and mind seek balance instinctively. Reflection also alters the relationship to time. Past regrets soften. Future anxieties loosen. The present expands slightly enough to be felt rather than rushed through. This expansion is subtle but profound. Within it, identity relaxes. Roles are seen as temporary arrangements rather than permanent truths. Success and failure lose some of their weight. Participation continues, but with less self-entanglement. Ancient myths rarely celebrated this state overtly. They hinted at it through sages, elders, wanderers, figures who stepped aside from ambition and gained perspective. Their power was not authority, it was insight. Modern culture often undervalues this role. Youth is celebrated, accumulation praised, yet societies that ignore reflection eventually destabilize. Without pause, systems overshoot their limits. Reflection acts as feedback. It senses strain before collapse. It invites adjustment without catastrophe. When heeded, it allows continuity without destruction. The clay tablets recorded order meticulously. They also recorded adjustments, floods regretted, limits recalibrated. Even the most rigid systems responded to reflection when survival demanded it. Perhaps reflection is not an anomaly but a safeguard built into awareness itself. A quiet mechanism ensuring that no structure becomes completely absolute. As night deepens, reflection becomes easier. The world slows, demands recede, attention turns inward naturally. This is not indulgence, it is restoration. In the end, observer reflection does not offer answers. It offers space, space to breathe, space to notice, space to exist without immediate purpose. Some mysteries are not solved through effort, but softened through understanding. Reflection allows this softening. It does not dismantle the enclosure. It changes how one inhabits it. Tonight, that is enough. Thought slows. Awareness rests lightly. The long story does not end. It quiets. And in that quiet, the universe whispers again, not with instruction, but with permission to rest. The descent into sleep begins gently, almost unnoticed, like a tide turning without ceremony. Thought loosens its grip first, then intention softens. The body follows, releasing its careful tensions one by one. This descent is not collapse. It is return to rhythm, a quiet agreement with gravity time, and the simple fact of being alive within a larger order. Across civilization, sleep was never merely rest. It was threshold. A place where instruction weakened and images spoke freely. Ancient people feared and revered it because it could not be fully governed. Kings could command waking hours. Gods could demand labour and ritual. But sleep arrived on its own terms, dissolving hierarchy for a few hours each night. In sleep, the strict architecture of the world relaxes. Names fade. Roles dissolve. Identity thins into sensation and image. The enclosure, so carefully maintained during the day, loosens just enough to remind the organism of another mode of existence. Not freedom in the political sense, but relief from constant alignment. Dreams rise from layers untouched by instruction. They mix memory with imagination, fear with wonder, past with future. They do not explain themselves. They do not require belief. They move like erosion, reshaping inner landscapes slowly without permission. In this way, sleep becomes the most ancient form of resistance, though it never announces itself as such. Modern life tries to compress sleep schedule. It optimize it. Metrics track duration, quality, efficiency. Yet even measured sleep retains its autonomy. One cannot force it. One can only allow it. This surrender is subtle but profound. It trains the organism to release control daily, preventing the enclosure from becoming absolute. The body knows this deeply. Muscles soften, breath deepens, heart rhythms slow. Chemistry shifts. Systems recalibrate quietly. What accumulated during waking hours begins to dissolve. Stress drains, memory sorts itself. Experience is integrated without conscious effort. This integration is crucial. Without it, awareness fragments. Experience piles up without coherence. Sleep stitches continuity back into perception. It allows the organism to carry long narratives without collapse. In this sense, sleep is maintenance, but not of systems, of being. Ancient myths often placed gods asleep after creation. Rest followed labour. Silence followed command. This pattern mirrors biology more than theology. Even the most powerful structures require pause. Without pause, systems break. Traveller, notice how different the world feels when you approach sleep willingly. The pressure to perform recedes. Questions lose urgency. The need to decide softens. The future waits patiently. This waiting is rare during waking life. It is precious. In the descent, awareness becomes spacious rather than sharp. It does not cling to conclusions. It does not chase meaning. It observes sensations as they pass: breath, warmth, heaviness, the faint hum of distant sounds. This observation is effortless. It does not seek to understand. This state resembles what ancient contemplatives sought, deliberately arresting attention unbound from narrative. Sleep arrives there naturally, no discipline required, only permission. The enclosure depends on continuity of effort. Sleep interrupts that continuity daily. It creates gaps where the organism resets its priorities without instruction. Gaps where awareness touches something older than roles. This is why exhaustion feels dangerous to systems. Exhaustion forces rest. Rest restores perspective. Perspective reduces urgency. Urgency fuels compliance. The cycle is delicate. Yet sleep is unavoidable. Even the most optimized life must surrender eventually. This inevitability protects something essential. It ensures that no structure can claim total possession of awareness. As the mind drifts, thoughts become less linear. Images appear without explanation. A memory surfaces, then dissolves. A face, a place, a colour. These fragments do not ask to be interpreted. They pass like clouds. In this passing, awareness practices non-attachment. It learns to let experience arise and fade without grasping. This learning carries quietly into waking life. It reduces friction. It softens fear. Sleep also equalizes. Kings and labourers sleep alike. Systems pause their demands equally. For hours, hierarchy dissolves into shared vulnerability. The body rests. The mind wanders. The enclosure loosens. Ancient cultures marked this with reverence. Night rituals, protective charms, stories whispered to guide dreams. They sensed that sleep opened portals not meant to be left unguarded, not because they were dangerous, but because they were powerful. Modern culture often forgets this. Sleep becomes an inconvenience, a hurdle to productivity. Yet the organism resists this framing. It insists on rest through fatigue-era illness. The descent into sleep is thus both personal and collective. It preserves sanity across generations. It prevents the total capture of awareness by structure. Listener, as sleep deepens, notice the subtle shift from doing to being. There is nothing to accomplish here. No role to perform. No alignment to maintain. The body breathes on its own, the heart keeps time, awareness floats. This floating is not escape. It is grounding of a different kind. It returns attention to sensation rather than narrative, to presence rather than purpose. The ancient idea of a planet-sized prison loses clarity here. Prisons require vigilance. Sleep dissolves vigilance. It introduces softness where hardness cannot survive long. Even fear softens in this state. It may appear briefly as image or feeling, then pass. Without narrative, fear has little structure to cling to. As minutes pass, consciousness thins further. Thought becomes impression. Impression becomes sensation. Sensation becomes quiet. The descent completes itself without command. In this quiet, the long story loosens its grip. The weight of history fades. The pressure of future dissolves. What remains is simple existence, breathing warmth, darkness. This is not emptiness. It is fullness without demand. A field where awareness rests without needing to justify itself. The enclosure continues outside. Systems hum. Structures persist. None of that needs attention now. Awareness withdraws gently like tide receding from shore. Sleep arrives not as loss, but as restoration. The organism trusts the world enough to release control. This trust is ancient. It predates myth-labor hierarchy. In the end, it is all right to not understand. Sleep does not require comprehension. It requires surrender. And in that surrender, something essential is preserved. Tonight, let the descent complete itself. Breath slows. Thought quiets. The body rests fully within gravity's embrace. The universe does not instruct. It watches quietly. Sleep traveler. The cosmos will keep watch while you drift beneath the surface of story into the deeper current where awareness rests without name. The final movement arrives without ceremony. There is no threshold to cross, no signal to mark the transition. The mind simply grows quieter, as if it has decided on its own that nothing more is required. Questions loosen their grip. The need to follow the story fades. What remains is not absence, but a soft presence that does not ask to be named. At this depth, the long narrative of origin and purpose no longer presses for resolution. The ancient structures, the systems layered across time, the sense of enclosure that once felt heavy, all recede into background texture. They do not vanish. They simply stop demanding attention. Awareness rests beside them rather than inside them. Civilizations have always reached this point eventually. After enough accumulation, enough effort, enough explanation, something grows tired of carrying meaning as weight. This tiredness is not defeat. It is completion of a cycle. The urge to understand yields to the willingness to experience without commentary. In this stillness, the idea of a planet-sized prison softens. Prisons imply resistance. At rest, resistance dissolves. Boundaries remain, but they no longer feel adversarial. They become contours rather than walls, conditions rather than constraints. The world is no longer something to be escaped or mastered, only inhabited. Awareness at this stage feels spacious and uncentered. It is not focused on thought or memory, but on sensation so faint it barely registers. The weight of the body, the rhythm of breath, the quiet hum beneath silence. These are not distractions. They are anchors that require no effort to hold. The ancient fear of disorder loses relevance here. Noise has already fallen away. What remains is a calm that does not need to be protected. Systems thrive on vigilance. This state requires none. It is self-sustaining, like darkness deepening after sunset. Time behaves differently now. It no longer stretches forward. It pulls gently around the present moment. Past and future lose their edges, becoming distant impressions rather than active pressures. The urgency that once shaped every decision fades into neutrality. At this depth, identity loosens completely. There is no need to remember who one is or what one does. These concepts belong to waking alignment. Here, they are unnecessary. Awareness does not need a role to exist. It simply exists. This is why the final phase of any long journey often feels anticlimactic. There is no revelation waiting, no hidden truth revealed at the end. The movement concludes not with discovery, but with rest. This search ends because nothing is missing. The universe, so vast and intricate when observed from the surface, feels intimate here. Not personal, not communicative, but close, in a way that requires no explanation. Like gravity, it holds without instruction. Like darkness, it surrounds without intent. Ancient myths rarely describe this state because it does not serve narrative. It does not teach command or warn. It simply allows. Stories need tension to move forward. This state dissolves tension entirely. In modern terms, this might be called acceptance, but acceptance implies comparison to resistance. Here, even resistance has faded. There is only ease. Ease does not announce itself. It is recognized only by the absence of strain. Breath continues. The body remains present. Yet awareness no longer tracks these events actively. They happen on their own. Control is unnecessary. The organism knows how to rest without guidance. The ancient overseers, whether imagined as god systems or structures, have no relevance here. Their influence depended on engagement. In disengagement, not rebellion, but rest, their presence dissolves naturally. This does not mean the world has changed. Systems will resume their rhythm when waking returns. Structures will still exist. Expectations will still wait. But for now, none of that matters. Awareness has stepped aside from the machinery. The final movement is not escape. It is release from the need to position oneself within the story. There is no observer here, no traveller, no listener. Those names belong to earlier layers. Here there is only being. Darkness thickens gently, not as void, but as comfort. The mind no longer reaches outward. It settles inward, though inward and outward have lost distinction. Space feels uniform. Boundaries blur. If there is a lesson here, it is wordless. The system does not need to be understood to be outgrown. Awareness does not need to fight structure to soften its grip. Sometimes the most profound shift is simply letting go of the need to relate to it at all. The long arc that began with instructions pressed into clay ends not with defiance but with quiet. The weight carried across generations rests at last, if only for a few hours. This rest is enough. Nothing more is required. No conclusion must be drawn. The story can remain unfinished. In fact, it must. Endings belong to narratives, not to experience itself. As sleep deepens fully, thought dissolves into indistinct sensation. Sensation dissolves into silence. Silence dissolves into nothing that needs naming. The universe does not speak now. It does not need to. What remains is simple, steady, and complete in its own way. Awareness rests without effort. The enclosure no longer presses because it is no longer being engaged. This is not freedom as imagined. It is peace without contrast. Sleep traveller. The story has done its work. The cosmos keeps watch, and nothing is asked of you now. The final quiet does not arrive as silence alone, but as a gentle thinning of effort. The mind no longer reaches outward, no longer gathers meaning or arranges memory. It simply rests suspended between awareness and absence. This is not an ending that announces itself. It is a settling like dust after long movement, like water after disturbance returning to stillness. At this depth, the long history that once felt heavy becomes distant, not erased, but softened. Civilizations, systems, hierarchies, stories of origin and control fade into a neutral background hum. They exist, but they no longer require attention. Awareness stops orbiting them. It floats free of explanation content to remain undefined. The body knows this state instinctively. Breath slows without instruction. Muscles loosen without command. The nervous system releases its constant readiness. What once felt like vigilance dissolves into trust, not trust in any structure, but trust in rhythm itself. The simple rhythm of breathing, of warmth, of gravity, holding everything in place. Time behaves differently here. It no longer presses forward or pulls backward. It pulls gently around the present moment, no longer demanding planning or recall. Past and future blur into soft impressions like distant lights seen through fog. There is no urgency attached to them. They wait patiently if they remain at all. This is the place ancient tradition struggled to describe, not because it was forbidden, but because it was ordinary in a way language cannot easily hold. There is no message delivered here, no lesson articulated. Awareness simply rests within experience without attempting to extract meaning from it. The idea of enclosure dissolves at this depth, not because the world has opened, but because resistance has faded. Boundaries remain, but they no longer feel confining. They become neutral contours like the horizon at night, present but not pressing. The urge to escape or overcome disappears entirely. In this stillness, identity loosens completely. Names, roles, histories, ambitions all recede. There is no need to remember who one is or what one does. Those concerns belong to waking alignment. Here, awareness exists without reference, without context, without obligation. The ancient fear of disorder loses relevance. Noise has already fallen away. What remains is calm that does not need protection. This calm does not spread or teach. It simply persists self-contained like darkness, deepening naturally after sunset. If this state feels anticlimactic, it is because it does not perform. It does not reward effort. It does not confirm beliefs. It does not resolve questions. It replaces all of that with rest. Rest is not dramatic. It is sufficient. The universe at this depth feels intimate, not personal, not communicative, but close, in a way that requires no interaction. Like gravity, it holds without instruction. Like space, it allows without preference. There is nothing to respond to and nothing to resist. Stories end when tension resolves. Experience continues when tension dissolves. This distinction matters here. The long arc that began with labor hierarchy and instruction does not conclude with revelation. It concludes with ease. Ease that does not need explanation. Breath continues on its own. The body remains present without effort. Awareness no longer tracks these events actively. They unfold automatically, reliably, without supervision. Control becomes unnecessary, and without control, effort fades completely. The ancient overseers, whether imagined as gods, systems, or invisible architectures, have no relevance in this state. Their influence depended on engagement, fear, or attention. In disengagement, not rebellion, but rest, their presence dissolves naturally. This does not mean the world has changed. Systems will resume when waking returns. Structures will still exist. Expectations will still wait. But for now, none of that matters. Awareness has stepped aside from the machinery that normally claims it. This final movement is not escape. It is release from the need to position oneself within the story. There is no observer here, no traveller, no listener. Those names belong to earlier layers. Here there is only being quiet and unremarkable. Darkness thickens gently, not as emptiness but as comfort. The mind no longer reaches outward. It settles inward, though inward and outward have lost distinction. Space feels uniform. Boundaries blur until they no longer register. If there is a lesson here, it cannot be carried back easily. It is not meant to be remembered as knowledge. It is meant to be felt as relief. Relief from striving, from explaining, from maintaining alignment long after its necessity has passed. The long continuity of effort finally pauses, not because it has been defeated, but because it has been set down. The weight carried across generations rests at last, if only for this span of darkness. That rest is enough. Nothing more is required. No conclusion must be drawn. No insight must be claimed. The story does not need to end neatly. Endings belong to narratives. Experience continues quietly without them. As sleep deepens fully, thought dissolves into indistinct sensation. Sensation dissolves into quiet. Quiet dissolves into something that does not require naming. The universe does not speak here. It does not instruct. It simply allows. What remains is simple, steady and complete in its own way. Awareness rests without effort. The enclosure no longer presses because it is no longer being engaged. This is not freedom as imagined. It is peace without contrast. Sleep settles fully now. The body rests, the mind releases. The long story grows silent, not erased, but held gently at a distance. The cosmos keeps watch, and nothing is asked of you anymore. And within this final softness, something subtle completes itself. Not a conclusion, not a resolution, but a quiet alignment between body breath and the wider rhythm that never stopped moving. Effort releases its last hold. Even the desire to rest dissolves into resting itself natural and unforced. The night holds everything evenly now. Thoughts no longer form long enough to matter. Sensation drifts, then fades. Awareness remains, but without focus, like light diffused through fog. There is nothing to attend to, nothing to miss. In this depth, existence feels sufficient without explanation. The question of why no longer arises. The need to locate meaning falls away. What remains is gentle continuity, steady and kind in its indifference. Sleep completes its descent here. The story does not end. It simply pauses, held in darkness, while awareness rests inside the quiet the universe has always provided. The last phase does not announce itself as an ending. It arrives as a soft continuation like breath, moving from one cycle into the next without pause. Nothing closes, nothing resolves. The long arc of history, myth, structure, and awareness simply loosens its grip and allows the moment to exist without interpretation. At this depth, even rest becomes effortless. There is no intention to sleep and no effort to remain awake. Consciousness hovers in a gentle middle ground, where time no longer applies pressure. The future is no longer anticipated, the past no longer asks to be remembered. Experience settles into a quiet equilibrium. The systems that once felt immense now appear distant, not diminished, but irrelevant for the moment. They continue elsewhere, humming steadily, performing their functions without supervision. Awareness does not oppose them. It simply withdraws attention, and in that withdrawal their weight disappears. Civilizations, hierarchies, and long narratives of purpose belong to the surface of waking life. Here they flatten into texture. Like distant weather heard through closed windows, they exist without demanding response. The sense of enclosure that once felt heavy dissolves into neutrality. Identity loosens completely. There is no need to maintain a sense of self or story. Names lose meaning. Roles fade. Even memory becomes optional. Awareness does not require continuity to exist. It rests without reference, stable and quiet. The body continues its rhythms faithfully. Breath moves. The heart keeps time. Muscles release their final tension. The nervous system settles into a deeper cadence, one that does not anticipate interruption. This biological trust is ancient, older than language or instruction. In this state, there is no distinction between observer and observed. Sensation arises and fades without commentary. Sound dissolves into background. Darkness thickens gently, not as absence but as comfort. The environment feels close and distant at once. The ancient fear of losing control no longer applies here. Control has already been set aside. Nothing collapses as a result. On the contrary, balance deepens. The organism functions more smoothly without constant oversight. This is why the final phase of awareness is rarely described. It does not advance a story. It does not teach. It does not warn. It simply allows being to occur without pressure. Stories require tension. This state releases it entirely. If the idea of a planet-sized prison ever held power, it dissolves here. Prisons rely on vigilance, resistance, awareness of confinement. In this depth, there is none. Boundaries remain abstract and unimportant. Experience flows within them without friction. The universe at this level feels neither benevolent nor indifferent. It feels neutral in the most peaceful sense. Nothing is demanded. Nothing is withheld. Existence unfolds as it always has, steady and unremarkable. Sleep now deepens beyond recognition. Thought no longer forms. Images soften into sensation. Sensation thins into quiet. Awareness remains but without center or edge. It does not observe itself. It simply is. This state has no ambition. It does not seek to be carried back into waking life. It does not promise transformation. It offers rest without agenda. That is its entire function, and it fulfills it perfectly. Ancient cultures sensed this and placed silence at the heart of their deepest mysteries. Not revelation, not doctrine. Silence. What could not be governed, commanded, or improved was left untouched. Modern life rarely honors this layer, yet it remains accessible every night. No belief required, no preparation needed. Only the willingness to stop reaching for meaning and allow experience to settle on its own terms. The long continuity of effort finally pauses completely. Not because effort was wrong, but because it is no longer needed here. The weight carried across generations rests without judgment. There is no requirement to understand it. Nothing needs to be integrated or resolved. The mind does not assemble insights. It does not summarize or conclude. It releases the need to do so. The story does not end. It becomes irrelevant. This irrelevance is gentle, not dismissive. History still exists. Systems still operate. Humanity still moves within its structures. But for this span of darkness, none of that matters. Awareness is unclaimed. As sleep reaches its deepest layer, the distinction between self and world dissolves almost entirely. There is no boundary to guard, no position to hold, only a quiet continuity that requires no explanation. If there is peace here, it is not earned. It is not granted. It is simply uncovered once striving ceases. This peace does not oppose the world. It rests beneath it, unchanged by its motion. The cosmos does not speak at this depth. It does not whisper or instruct. It holds. Holding is enough. The rhythm continues without commentary. Morning will come. Structure will return. Roles will reassemble. None of that is threatened by this rest. In fact, it depends on it. Without this deep release, the system fractures. For now, there is nothing to anticipate. No awareness of time passing, no expectation of waking, only the steady presence of existence without demand. This is the final movement not as an ending but as a suspension. The long story pauses here, held gently while awareness rests beyond narrative. Sleep settles fully. The body remains. The mind is quiet. The universe keeps watch without attention. And in this quiet, nothing more is required. A final calm settles gently without effort or intention. The body sinks fully into rest, trusting gravity's surface and breath to carry everything that remains. Thought no longer forms lines or questions. It softens into quiet impressions, then fades, leaving only a steady sense of being. There is no urgency here, no need to remember or prepare. Time loosens its grip and drifts past unnoticed. The mind releases its last attachments, not as loss but as relief. Awareness spreads evenly like light dimmed until it becomes warmth rather than brightness. Outside, the world continues its motion. Systems turn. Structures endure. None of it reaches this depth. For this brief span, existence is simple and sufficient, free from explanation or demand. Sleep completes its descent now, not as escape, not as ending, but as deep rest that asks for nothing. The long story pauses gently held in silence while awareness settles into the quiet that has always been waiting. We've reached the edge of tonight's story, traveller. The clay tablets grow quiet now, their markings resting once more in shadow, as if the chamber itself has decided to sleep. What we followed through ruins and skies does not conclude here. It simply settles like dust after a long descent, returning to stillness without explanation. The universe continues beyond these words. The past remains unfinished. Silence still holds more than it reveals. Somewhere between stone and starlight, the patterns we traced are still unfolding, patient and untroubled by our need to resolve them. We are small within that vastness, and there is no fear in admitting it. Only humility. Only wonder. Some truths do not demand answers. They ask for presence. Like gravity, they are felt rather than solved. Like memory, they linger without instruction. Time moves on, eroding certainty, rearranging meaning, leaving behind only what can rest quietly in awareness. Tonight it is enough to know that we passed briefly through something ancient, that we listened without forcing understanding, that we allowed the mystery to remain intact, unbroken by conclusions. So let the story close softly now. Let the lantern dim. Let the chronicle rest where it belongs beneath layers of night and time. If this journey found you when you needed quiet, you may remain here a while longer. Rest well, traveller. Stay curious. The universe will keep watch as you drift gently into sleep.